A young nurse begins working in a decaying mansion, caring for a mute boy who she discovers can communicate through writing, revealing dark secrets about his caregivers. The road leading to the old Whitmore mansion wound through a dense forest of oaks and beeches, their canopies forming an almost shadowy tunnel even at midday. Emily drove her compact car, watching as the sunlight struggled to penetrate the tangle of leaves above her, creating a play of light and shadow that made her heart beat a little faster. It wasn't just the melancholic beauty of the landscape that gave her a sense of unease. It was the weight of the task that awaited her. As she approached the mansion's wrought iron gate, Emily couldn't help but be impressed by the imposing structure that emerged. The Whitmore Mansion, a Victorian construction with asymmetrical towers and a reddish brick facade, seemed to absorb the region's history. Even in its slight decline, with ivy climbing the walls and some windows fogged up, the place exuded an old-fashioned charm. Once she parked her car in the wide gravel driveway, Emily took a deep breath, clutching her nursing bag tightly. She knew her first day at the mansion would be challenging. Her task was to care for Tommy, a boy who, according to the medical report, did not speak and rarely interacted with the world around him. As she walked towards the front door, Emily felt a mix of nervousness and determination. She was there to make a difference, to penetrate Tommy's silence with her gentle and patient presence. The door was opened by a middle-aged woman whose rigid posture and penetrating gaze gave her a brief pause. "You must be Nurse Emily," she said, with a voice that carried unquestionable authority. "I am Mrs. Black, the housekeeper. Come, I'll take you to him." Following Mrs. Black through long corridors with wooden floors that creaked under their steps, Emily observed the interior decoration. Family portraits looking sternly from their golden frames, faded tapestries telling stories of glorious times, and a palpable sense that every object there had a story to tell. The mansion was a labyrinth of preserved memories, and each step within it seemed to lead her deeper into a forgotten past. Finally, they reached a room at the end of an isolated corridor. The door was ajar, and the soft sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, illuminating the interior. Mrs. Black gestured for Emily to enter alone. "Tommy is inside. He may not react to you, but he's gentle. I'll be nearby if you need anything." Emily nodded, taking a moment to compose herself before crossing the threshold. Tommy's room was spacious, with a large window overlooking the mansion's back gardens, and toys scattered everywhere, indicating attempts to bring joy to a silent inner world. In the center, there was a bed where a thin boy with dark hair lay, staring fixedly at the ceiling. Carefully approaching, Emily sat beside the bed. "Hello, Tommy," she said softly, trying not to startle him. "My name is Emily. I'm going to stay with you for a while, okay?" There was no response, no movement, just a vague glance in her direction and then back to the ceiling. For a moment, Emily felt a wave of sadness seeing the boy's loneliness reflected in his dark and distant eyes. She lightly placed her hand on his, an attempt to offer comfort without words. Tommy did not withdraw his hand nor react, but Emily felt a small victory in that unrefused contact. She spent the rest of the afternoon there, speaking softly to Tommy about the garden she could see through the window, the colors of the flowers, and the birds' songs, even though he never responded. Emily was determined to reach him, convinced that behind that silence was a world waiting to be understood. Later that afternoon, while Emily organized some of her nursing supplies in Tommy's room, Mrs. Black reappeared at the door, her face maintaining the same severe and inscrutable expression as before. "He seems calm with you," she observed, crossing her arms as she watched Emily meticulously arrange the space around Tommy's bed. "I'm trying to make him comfortable with my presence," Emily replied, not taking her eyes off her tasks. "Any connection, no matter how small, can make a difference for him." Mrs. Black shrugged, her gaze wandering back to Tommy. "Just be careful," she warned, her tone suggesting more than just professional concern. This house has its secrets, and Dr. Harold, well, he doesn't like intrusions. Intrigued, Emily stopped what she was doing and turned to the housekeeper. "Do you think Tommy is here because of those secrets?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her caution. Mrs. Black seemed to hesitate, biting her lower lip as if pondering how much to reveal. "It's not my place to say," she finally replied, her voice low. "But you're a smart young woman. Keep your eyes open, and maybe you'll discover some things for yourself." With that, the housekeeper withdrew, leaving Emily with more questions than answers. Why had she been warned about Dr. Harold? And what secrets did the mansion hide that could be linked to Tommy's condition? In the following days, Emily began to explore more of the mansion during her brief breaks, guided by a mix of professional duty and growing curiosity about Mrs. Black's warnings. On one of these explorations, she discovered an old library that seemed untouched for years. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper and wood, and the shelves were filled with leather-bound books with titles that spoke of medicine, history, and classic literature. As she ran her fingers along the book spines, Emily noticed something unusual. A small book seemed out of place, pushed further back than the others. Curious, she pulled it out, and to her surprise, a small panel behind the shelf opened, revealing a communication board with letters and symbols. Surprised by the discovery, Emily took the board back to Tommy's room, thinking it might be a tool to help him communicate. When she showed the board to Tommy, his eyes, usually distant and unfocused, lit up for a brief moment, and a faint hint of interest crossed his face. Encouraged by this small reaction, Emily spent the next hour showing Tommy how to use the board, pointing to different letters and forming simple words. "See, like this," she explained patiently, forming the word sun by pointing to the corresponding letters. Tommy watched closely, and then, with a hesitation that seemed to consume much of his energy, he raised his trembling hand and pointed to the letter S. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding with the hope that she was about to witness a breakthrough. "That's it," she exclaimed, encouraging him. "You're doing it, Tommy. Keep going." In the minutes that followed, Tommy slowly formed the same word, sun. Although small, it was a significant moment, a glimpse of communication that rekindled Emily's determination to reach the boy trapped in silence. After the initial success with the communication board, Emily was more determined than ever to penetrate Tommy's silent world. However, she knew progress would be slow and that she needed more tools to help him express himself. During one of her walks through the library, searching for more materials that might serve as aids, Emily found a small diary hidden among the old books. It was a thin volume, covered in dust, with a worn leather cover and no inscription. Taking the diary to Tommy's room, Emily began to leaf through its pages during the boys' rest periods. To her surprise, the diary contained entries written in hurried handwriting, many of them seeming to be from years ago. The notes were brief, often coded with symbols and strange drawings. Some pages were marked with dates, while others only with enigmatic sketches that looked like maps or diagrams. With each page, Emily's curiosity grew. The entries mentioned a certain Project Albatross multiple times and referenced experimental medications. There were names mentioned alongside observations that seemed to indicate progress tracking. In one particularly disturbing entry, a list of names was accompanied by the word failed. Trying to piece things together, Emily increasingly felt that the diary contained secrets about what was really happening at the mansion and possibly about Tommy's condition. Determined to discover more, she decided to use the diary as a key to better understand the boy's situation and Dr. Harold's possible involvement. In the following days, Emily continued to explore the diary in search of more clues that might explain Tommy's condition and the nature of the activities at the mansion. She began to observe Tommy's behaviors and reactions more closely, especially when mentioning certain words or showing images related to the diary entries. One afternoon, while they were in the garden, Emily tested a theory. She casually mentioned Project Albatross while helping Tommy feel different plant textures. His reaction was subtle but significant. Tommy stopped moving for a moment, his expression tensed, and he quickly looked towards the house before lowering his eyes. Encouraged by this response, Emily decided she needed to speak directly with Dr. Harold to try to better understand the context of the diary's notes. Preparing for a delicate conversation, she approached the doctor that same evening when he visited Tommy for his daily checkup. "Dr. Harold," Emily began, trying to keep her voice neutral, "I found a diary that seems very old. In it, there are several mentions of something called Project Albatross. Can you tell me what that is?" Dr. Harold's reaction was immediate and revealing. His usual calm and controlled expression gave way to a quick and uneasy look. "Where did you find that diary?" he asked with an intensity Emily had never seen before. Realizing she had touched a sensitive point, Emily responded cautiously, "In the library, hidden among some books." Dr. Harold briefly closed his eyes as if calculating his next words. "That subject is from the past, something that does not concern you or any of the staff in the house currently. I suggest you focus on your responsibilities with Tommy and leave the past where it belongs." The evasive answer only made Emily more determined to uncover the truth. Something important was being hidden, and she felt it was crucial for Tommy's well-being to understand exactly what it was. After the tense conversation with Dr. Harold, Emily became even more intrigued and concerned about what might be hidden in the shadows of the Whitmore mansion. She knew she needed to proceed cautiously, but felt an increasing responsibility towards Tommy. If Project Albatross was somehow related to his condition, she couldn't just ignore the clues she found. The next day, while Dr. Harold was in the garden overseeing some gardeners, Emily seized the opportunity to confront him again, this time more directly. With the diary discreetly hidden in her bag, she approached him with firm determination. "Dr. Harold, I understand you may want to keep certain things in the past," Emily began, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt. "But if something in this diary affects Tommy, I need to know. I am responsible for his care." Dr. Harold stared at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Nurse Emily, you are here to attend to Tommy's medical needs, not to investigate the history of this house or my family," he replied, his voice low and controlled. "I insist that you leave this alone." Emily felt her frustration growing, but maintained her composure. "I respect your position in the house, doctor, but I am also here to protect Tommy. If there is something in his past that can help improve his condition or understand his behavior, I need to explore all possibilities." Dr. Harold paused, looking at her intensely. After a long moment, he sighed. "I cannot stop you from following your conscience, nurse. But be cautious with the shadows you choose to pursue. Not all are willing to be uncovered." With that enigmatic warning, he walked away, leaving Emily with a sense of alertness. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but she was now more determined than ever to uncover the truth. In the days following her confrontation with Dr. Harold, Emily began to feel she was being watched. Subtle movements in the shadows, doors that creaked lightly behind her, and quick glances exchanged between some of the staff. Her concern grew until one night, Mrs. Black found her in the hallway, away from prying ears. "Come with me, Nurse Emily," the housekeeper said in an urgent whisper, guiding her to a small sitting room that was rarely used. Once inside, Mrs. Black locked the door and turned to Emily with a grave expression. "I know you found the diary and spoke with Dr. Harold. You are in danger here." Emily looked at Mrs. Black, surprised by the housekeeper's sudden change of behavior. "Why are you telling me this now? Do you know something about Project Albatross?" Mrs. Black sighed, the severity on her face giving way to a look of concern. "I was here when it all started. Project Albatross wasn't just medical research. It was something more dangerous. And Tommy is at the center of it all. Emily listened intently, each word increasing her fear and determination. What exactly were they trying to do? And how does it affect Tommy now? The research was about genetic manipulation and enhancing human abilities through experimental treatments. Tommy was one of the subjects. The project was abruptly shut down, but the consequences, well, you can see. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. And Dr. Harold was involved? He was the project leader, Mrs. Black confirmed, and he will do anything to ensure the project's secrets never come to light. Be very careful, nurse. With this new alliance formed and the truth beginning to emerge, Emily knew she had to protect Tommy and expose what had been done to him. Now, with Mrs. Black's help, she might have a chance. With the revelation of the dark secrets behind Project Albatross, Emily felt the weight of responsibility increasing. Every step she took within the mansion seemed to be monitored, and she began to notice more clearly the furtive glances and conversations that abruptly ended when she entered a room. The atmosphere of the house, already laden with mystery, now had a palpable tension that kept Emily constantly on alert. She decided to take additional precautions. Emily began documenting everything she saw and heard in a small notebook she always carried with her, hidden in an inner pocket of her uniform. Additionally, she and Mrs. Black developed a system of subtle signals to communicate discreetly whenever necessary. One gray afternoon, while walking through the silent corridors of the mansion, Emily noticed a shadow moving quickly down a side corridor. She discreetly followed, keeping her distance. The shadow led her to a part of the house she rarely visited, where she found a slightly ajar door. Looking through it, she saw two of the staff members speaking quietly, occasionally glancing at a set of monitors displaying various cameras installed throughout the mansion. Realizing that every movement she made was being recorded and observed, Emily silently retreated, her mind spinning with the implications. She needed to be even more cautious now that she knew the extent of the surveillance. Returning to Tommy's room, she wondered how much of her interaction with the boy had been observed and assessed by the unknown eyes behind the cameras. Later that night, as Emily prepared Tommy for bed, the room door suddenly opened. Dr. Harold entered, his expression harder and colder than usual. Emily immediately went on alert, her heart beating faster as she faced the doctor's penetrating gaze. "Nurse Emily," Dr. Harold began, his voice low and threatening, "it seems you did not take my warnings about excessive curiosity seriously." He closed the door behind him, locking it, a gesture that sent waves of panic through Emily. "Dr. Harold, Emily tried to speak, but was interrupted. "No, let me be clear," he continued, approaching her. "You are here at my invitation, and you may very well find yourself out of this house if you continue to interfere in matters that do not concern you." His threat was clear, and his physical proximity imposed a real fear. Emily swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "I am only trying to do what is best for Tommy," she said, her voice firm despite her fear. "The best for Tommy is for you to follow this house's rules and stop searching for answers you don't want to find," said Dr. Harold, looking at her so intensely that Emily had to look away. When Dr. Harold finally left, Emily was alone in the room with Tommy, who was visibly disturbed by the tension. She knelt beside his bed, gently holding his hand. "It's going to be okay, Tommy," she whispered, more to herself than to him. But as Emily lay down that night, Dr. Harold's words echoed in her mind, and she knew things were far from okay. She was now in a dangerous position, and every decision she made from that moment on could have profound consequences not only for her but also for Tommy. After Dr. Harold's direct threat, Emily knew she needed to act more cautiously but was more determined than ever to uncover the secrets hidden at the Whitmore mansion. On a rainy morning, while the house was still quiet, Emily ventured back to the library. She needed to recover the diary she had hidden among the old books after her last conversation with Dr. Harold. With her heart pounding, Emily walked through the dark corridors, her path lit only by the faint light of her flashlight. Upon reaching the library, she quickly found the diary hidden behind a collection of old encyclopedias. With the book back in her hands, Emily flipped through its pages, searching for any details she might have missed before. As she read, she discovered a series of notes about specific experiments and dates that seemed to coincide with significant events in Tommy's life. Armed with this new information, Emily planned how she could use the diary to confront Dr. Harold again, this time with concrete evidence he couldn't ignore. Aware of the risk of being monitored, Emily began meeting secretly with Mrs. Black in discreet locations within the mansion, such as the old orchid greenhouse, where surveillance cameras did not reach. During these meetings, they shared information and planned how they could protect Tommy and expose Dr. Harold's actions. In one of these meetings, Mrs. Black brought documents she had found hidden in Dr. Harold's office. The documents included correspondence with anonymous investors and progress reports on the experiments, providing a direct connection between the project and external financiers with dubious interests. Equipped with the diary and the documents, Emily prepared for the next step, bringing in a trusted lawyer to help investigate the legality of the experiments conducted on Tommy. She knew that to fight against Dr. Harold and his influence, she would need robust and indisputable legal support. To better understand the context of the suspicious activities surrounding Tommy, Emily decided to delve deeper into the history of the mansion and the Whitmore family. With Mrs. Black's help, she accessed the attic, where she found boxes of old photographs and older Whitmore family diaries dating back several decades. As she flipped through the diaries, Emily discovered the story of Arthur Whitmore, Dr. Harold's grandfather, who initially began investigating the potential of genetic treatments to cure hereditary diseases. The intentions seemed noble in the early generations, but as the years passed, the nature of the experiments changed, becoming more ambitious and morally questionable. The records revealed how the project gradually deviated from its original goals into human enhancement experiments, with Dr. Harold taking over and pushing the research to dangerous extremes. Emily realized that the project's transformation into something sinister coincided with Tommy's birth, who seemed to be not just a patient, but also a key experiment in Project Albatross. Armed with a deeper understanding of the past and motivated by the urgent need to protect Tommy, Emily decided it was time to seek concrete evidence of Dr. Harold's current activities. She knew that confronting Dr. Harold with only historical information would not be enough. She needed irrefutable proof of recent experiments. One night, taking advantage of a storm that cut power to parts of the mansion, Emily, with Mrs. Black's help, accessed Dr. Harold's private office. They rummaged through files and found a series of video files and audio recordings documenting experimental sessions with Tommy and other subjects. The recordings were disturbing, showing Dr. Harold's scientific coldness as he administered experimental treatments. Copying everything she could onto a flash drive, Emily knew she now had the evidence she needed to expose Dr. Harold's unethical practices. With the storm still raging outside, they carefully returned to Tommy's room, where Emily promised the boy, still asleep, that she would do everything in her power to end his suffering. With the evidence in hand and the storm still causing havoc around the mansion, Emily knew that the window of opportunity to act was now. She and Mrs. Black carefully planned how they could leave the mansion undetected by the still operational security cameras or Dr. Harold's staff, who might be on alert despite the bad weather. Emily decided that the best time to leave would be during the change of shift for the security guards, a time when their focus might not be as sharp. With Tommy asleep and unaware of the danger, Emily packed a small backpack with essential items for him, including medications and the flash drive with the evidence. She dressed Tommy in warm clothes and wrapped him in a thick blanket, ready to carry him if necessary. At Mrs. Black's signal, who watched the hallway, they left the room. With each step, Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, not just for the evidence she carried but also for Tommy's safety, whose life seemed to hang by a thread in the face of Dr. Harold's unpredictable actions. As they moved silently through the dark corridors, Emily, Mrs. Black, and Tommy managed to reach the back door of the mansion. However, just as they were about to leave, Emily heard voices coming from a usually locked room. Curious and cautious, she approached and listened carefully. Inside the room, Dr. Harold was discussing with an unknown figure, a man with a deep voice who spoke about the need to accelerate the project, regardless of the consequences. Emily recorded a snippet of the conversation with her cell phone, realizing that those words could be further evidence of third-party involvement and the pressure to continue the experiments at any cost. As they moved away enough not to be discovered, Emily felt a mix of relief and horror. Relief at having managed to escape and horror at understanding the magnitude of the conspiracy involving Tommy. Knowing they couldn't just flee, Emily decided the next step was to seek external help immediately. She needed someone outside the mansion she could trust to ensure Tommy's safety and help bring Dr. Harold and his accomplices to justice. With the decision to seek external help, Emily, Mrs. Black, and Tommy hurried to reach the property's gate. However, before they could completely leave the mansion's grounds, lights suddenly turned on around them, and figures emerged from the shadows. Dr. Harold's security guards, who had clearly been alerted to their escape attempt. They were quickly surrounded, and despite Emily's protests, they were escorted back to the mansion under strict surveillance. Emily held Tommy's hand tightly, trying to convey to him some sense of security despite her own heart racing with fear of the possible consequences of her actions. Once inside, they were taken directly to Dr. Harold's office, where he awaited them, his expression a mix of controlled fury and disappointment. "I truly hoped it wouldn't come to this, Nurse Emily," he began, his voice calm despite the intensity in his eyes. "You could have remained safe here if you had just followed the rules." In the office, under Dr. Harold's vigilant gaze and his guards, Emily was subjected to an interrogation about her motivations and what she knew about the mansion's secret projects. Dr. Harold wanted to know every detail about how much Emily had discovered and who else was aware of the information. Keeping as calm as possible, Emily chose her words carefully, trying not to reveal the existence of the flash drive with the copied evidence. "I just wanted to protect Tommy," she stated. "Everything I did was for his sake." Dr. Harold listened, his features inscrutable. After a long moment of silence, he stood and walked to the window, looking out. "Your sense of justice is admirable, but you are playing a very dangerous game, Emily. You have no idea of the extent of what is involved here." At the end of the interrogation, Emily was taken to a small room within the mansion, where she was instructed to remain until Dr. Harold decided what to do with her. Mrs. Black was sent back to her duties, but not without exchanging a look of complicity with Emily, a silent promise that they would still try to find a way out. While confined, Emily reflected on her next actions. She knew that despite the risk, she needed to find a way to reveal the evidence she had, hoping that exposing Dr. Harold's secrets would protect Tommy and put an end to the experiments once and for all. In the small room where Emily was confined, the silence was almost palpable, interrupted only by the occasional sound of footsteps in the corridor. She knew time was running out and that she needed to act quickly. In a risky move, she took the flash drive hidden in a seam of her uniform and inserted it into an old computer she found in the room, hoping it still worked and had internet access. Luckily, the computer was connected, and Emily quickly opened her email, attaching the most incriminating evidence she had copied and sending it to a trusted investigative journalist she knew. She knew that once the information was released, Dr. Harold would have no way to contain the scandal. Just as she sent the email, she heard the door being unlocked. It was Mrs. Black, accompanied by one of the security guards who seemed unexpectedly nervous. "We have to leave now," Mrs. Black whispered urgently, hurrying Emily. The security guard, a young man Emily recognized from the mansion rounds, nodded in agreement, clearly conflicted but determined to help them. Guided by the guard, Emily and Mrs. Black managed to avoid the other guards and exited the mansion under the cover of darkness. The young guard led them to the gate, where a car was already waiting, the driver ready to take them far from the Whitmore mansion. Emily looked back, seeing the mansion's silhouette disappear into the night, and felt a mix of relief and anxiety about what would come next. As the car drove away from the mansion, Emily tried to process the night's events. She knew that although they were fleeing, the real fight was just beginning. The journalist she sent the evidence to had already responded to her email, confirming that the information was explosive and that he would start investigating immediately. Mrs. Black, sitting beside her, held her hand, a look of determination on her face. "We will ensure no one else is harmed by those experiments," she said, her voice firm. Emily nodded, feeling renewed resolve. "Tommy and the others deserve justice, and we will fight to get it for them." As they discussed their next steps, Emily's phone rang. It was the journalist, his voice urgent. "Emily, the evidence you sent, it's more significant than you imagined. We need to meet. There is more at stake here, and it seems there are powerful people involved who will do anything to keep this a secret." The call was abruptly cut off, leaving Emily and Mrs. Black alarmed. They exchanged worried glances, knowing they were now not only fighting against Dr. Harold, but possibly against a much larger and more dangerous network. As the car approached the city, the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the sky, symbolizing a new day and new challenges. Emily looked out the window, determined to face whatever was necessary to protect Tommy and expose the truth. With the dawn bringing new possibilities and challenges, Emily and Mrs. Black arrived at a safe location in the city, where the journalist, Mark, was waiting for them. He quickly took them to a private room, where multiple monitors were already set up displaying the information Emily had sent. "The evidence you found not only incriminates Dr. Harold and his financiers, but also points to a much broader scheme of genetic manipulation that could have national, perhaps even international, ramifications," Mark explained, showing them the documents and videos in detail. "This is bigger than anything I've ever reported." Determined, Emily listened attentively, absorbing the magnitude of the situation. She felt small in the face of the problem's extent, but her resolve to protect Tommy and others like him was unshakable. "What do we need to do now?" she asked, ready to act. "First, we need to go public with this. With your permission, Emily, I'll prepare a series of detailed reports. At the same time, we need to ensure your safety and the evidence's security," said Mark, already beginning to organize his notes. As they prepared to release the story, Emily and Mrs. Black discussed the best way to care for Tommy during this tumultuous period. They decided it would be best to keep Tommy in a safe and discreet location until they could ensure there were no more risks to his safety. Following the publication of the initial reports, the reaction was immediate and explosive. The revelations about Project Albatross and Dr. Harold's illegal activities caused a public scandal, leading to government investigations and demands for reforms in the field of genetic research. Meanwhile, Emily frequently met with lawyers and human rights representatives, working to ensure that the victims of the experiments, especially children like Tommy, received adequate justice and compensation. During one of these meetings, a group of parents of other children involved in the experiments approached Emily, expressing their gratitude and asking for her help in understanding what had happened to their children. Emily, though overwhelmed by the responsibility, felt a new wave of determination. She promised these parents that she would do everything in her power to help them find answers and justice. As days passed and more details came to light, Emily watched the growing media coverage, feeling a complex mix of relief for having managed to expose the truth and the weight of the fight that still lay ahead. She knew that the legal battle would be long and complicated, but she was ready to face any challenge for the sake of Tommy and the others affected. As the story gained more attention, Emily knew she needed to act quickly to protect Tommy from the public eye and those who might still want to silence him. With the help of Mark and Mrs. Black, they organized a safe location for Tommy in a discreet house on the outskirts of the city, where he could receive the necessary care away from the tumult caused by the revelations. In this new environment, Tommy began to show signs of improvement. The absence of constant medical surveillance and Emily's loving care seemed to revive him. Emily hired pediatric and child psychology specialists to help treat Tommy, focusing not only on his physical health, but also on his emotional and psychological well-being. Watching Tommy play in the safe house's garden, Emily felt a mix of joy and pain. Joy at seeing him respond to the world more openly and pain at thinking of the years of suffering he had endured. She promised herself that she would do everything in her power to ensure Tommy had a full and happy life from that point on. As Tommy's case and those of others involved in the experiments gained more visibility, Emily worked with lawyers and activists to ensure all affected children received the care and compensation they deserved. Discussions on ethics in genetic research and the regulation of human experiments intensified, leading to significant legislative changes. During this time, Emily kept Tommy out of the spotlight, concerned with protecting his privacy and allowing him to have as normal a childhood as possible. They began searching for a permanent, adoptive family for Tommy, one that could offer the loving and stable environment he needed to continue his recovery and growth. Emily found a family with experience caring for children with complex trauma histories. After many meetings and careful consideration, it was clear that Tommy would be well cared for and loved. The farewell was bittersweet for Emily, who had developed a deep bond with Tommy, but she knew it was the best decision for him. Watching Tommy adapt to his new family, Emily felt a sense of peace, knowing he finally had the chance to live the life he deserved. She continued to be involved as a support figure, frequently visiting and ensuring Tommy felt safe and loved. With Tommy's situation stabilized and him adjusting to his new family, Emily focused on the trial of Dr. Harold and his accomplices. The evidence she had collected played a crucial role in the process, resulting in a robust case against the doctor and the network of financiers who supported the illegal experiments. During the trial, Emily was called to testify, a moment she faced with a mix of anxiety and determination. In front of the court, she meticulously detailed her discoveries, from Tommy's conditions at the mansion to the evidence of unethical experiments conducted under Dr. Harold's direction. The defense tried to discredit Emily, questioning her experience and motivations, but the evidence was undeniable. The presentation of video recordings and documents she had found left the court in silence, with the impact of the revelations deeply felt by all present. With the trial concluded and Dr. Harold convicted, along with several of his associates, a dark chapter was closed, but for Emily, it was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Driven by her experience at the Whitmore mansion, she decided to dedicate her career to protecting children from abuse in medical research and working for reform in the regulations on human experiments. Emily founded a nonprofit organization that not only offered support to victims of unethical medical experiments, but also actively worked to change legislation, ensuring that children's consent and protection were prioritized in any medical research. Besides her work, Emily maintained a close relationship with Tommy and his new family. She frequently visited, bringing gifts and spending time with him, now clearly happier and healthier in his new home. Each smile and laugh from Tommy reinforced to Emily the importance of her mission and the difference a determined person could make. After the trial and the foundation of her organization, Emily began traveling around the country, giving lectures at universities, conferences, and forums on medical research ethics. She shared her experience and the lessons learned during her time with Tommy, emphasizing the need for constant vigilance to protect the most vulnerable. These travels also offered Emily the chance to connect with other health professionals, legislators, and activists who shared her mission. Together, they formed a powerful network of support and advocacy, pushing for significant changes in laws and practices. During a special conference, Emily was approached by a group of parents who deeply thanked her. They were family members of children who had been part of other experiments similar to Project Albatross. Emily's work had helped expose these programs and bring justice to their families as well. It was an emotional and reaffirming moment for Emily, seeing the real and positive impact of her work beyond her direct interaction with Tommy. The impact of Emily's actions extended beyond national borders. The exposure of Dr. Harold's experiments encouraged an international dialogue on the ethics of genetic research. Emily was invited to participate in UN panels, where she discussed the implications of genetic advances and the importance of a global regulatory framework that protected individuals' rights, especially children, in medical research. Through these forums, Emily helped draft guidelines adopted by several countries, promoting more ethical and transparent practices in science. Her work also inspired the creation of educational programs that focused on teaching young scientists the importance of ethics in their research. Back in her city, Emily visited Tommy, who was thriving under the care of his new family. Seeing his progress and happiness was the greatest reward for Emily. She knew that despite the challenges she had faced, the fight had been worth it. As the years passed, Emily continued her tireless work, becoming a respected and influential figure in the fight for ethical practices in medical research. Her legacy was evident not only in the laws that changed or the halted treatments, but also in the new generation of scientists and doctors who approached their work with a renewed awareness of the importance of ethics. One sunny afternoon, Emily organized a community event that brought together health professionals, patients, and families affected by questionable medical practices. The event served not only as a means of education and awareness, but also as a celebration of the progress made. During the event, Emily launched a book documenting her journey from discovering the experiments at the Whitmore Mansion to the changes she helped implement. The book was well received, serving as an educational resource and inspiration for many. Tommy, now a teenager, attended the event. He had grown into an articulate young man, aware of his history. Despite the initial challenges of his life, the love and support of his adoptive family and Emily helped him overcome adversity. Tommy spoke at the event, sharing his personal experience and thanking Emily and all those who fought for his safety and justice. The event culminated in a Q&A session where Emily and Tommy answered questions from the audience, many of them from young medical and law students eager for advice on how they could contribute to a more ethical future in their own careers. Emily emphasized the importance of remaining vigilant and committed to ethics, regardless of the pressures to the contrary. At the end of the day, as the sun set, Emily and Tommy walked together through the park where the event was held. They reflected on the journey they had shared, recognizing that each challenge faced had been an opportunity to grow and make a significant difference in the world. "You changed my life, Emily," Tommy said, looking at her with gratitude. "And I know you changed the lives of many others too." Emily smiled, feeling a mix of humility and pride. "We changed the world together, Tommy, and we will continue to do so, each in our own way." As they said their goodbyes, Emily looked to the future with hope, knowing that the work she began with the discovery of a dark secret in a forgotten mansion would continue to resonate, inspiring new generations to fight for justice and integrity. Tommy waved and joined his family, who awaited him with hugs and smiles. Emily watched for a moment, then turned to join the last guests still sharing their stories. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was full of potential, a potential she helped unlock. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button.